Before we begin, please lie down. Let your body sink into the quiet and gently step away from any noise around you. Allow your eyes to rest, your breathing to soften, and prepare to drift through the gentle details of this Native American story. If you'd like more calming journeys like this, you can subscribe to the History of Civilization channel. And if you wish, you may also leave a like. Now, let everything become still.
Dawn rose gently over the wide valley, touching the tops of the cedar trees with a faint shimmer of gold. The air carried the cool scent of river mist drifting lazily between the stones. A young hunter named Tahu walked in silence along the narrow path that wound through the tall grass, each step slow and deliberate, as though he wished not to disturb the earth beneath him. His tribe had lived in this valley for generations, guided by the rhythm of the seasons, the whisper of the wind, and the quiet wisdom passed down from their elders. Tahu paused by the riverbank, watching the soft currents spread light across the surface like silver threads. He knelt, dipped his hand into the cold water, and felt a calm certainty settling deep inside his chest. Today, he sensed, would bring a change, subtle like the shifting of a shadow, but real enough to stir the stillness of his heart. As the morning light widened across the valley, he raised his eyes to the distant hills, listening to the soft call of a lone bird echoing through the trees, its cry a reminder that every journey begins with a single quiet moment of awareness.
The path along the river curved deeper into the forest, where ancient pines rose like tall guardians watching over the land. Their branches swayed slowly in the early light, releasing the crisp scent of resin and damp bark. Tahu moved with unhurried steps, letting the forest's calm settle into his breath. He had walked this trail since childhood, but today it felt different, quiet, in a way that suggested it was listening. Ahead, the faint traces of animal tracks crossed the soil. A pair of deer, a lone fox, and the smaller prints of a rabbit weaving between fallen leaves. These signs were familiar to him, yet he found himself studying them carefully, as though they held a message he had not noticed before. He paused beside an old cedar that had stood longer than any living person in his tribe. Its trunk was wide and scarred from winters long past. Tahu rested his hand on its surface, feeling the deep grooves beneath his fingers. A soft breeze rustled through its branches, carrying with it the distant sound of water tumbling over stones. For a moment, he closed his eyes and simply listened. The forest breathed around him, steady and unhurried, as if inviting him to match its rhythm. As he continued onward, the sun rose higher, sending warm rays through breaks in the canopy. Light spilled over the mossy ground in shifting patterns, creating a path of pale gold ahead of him. Tahu followed it toward a clearing he had not visited since he was a boy, a small, quiet space where the grass grew taller and the wind carried a faint, humming sound born from the movement of reeds. He remembered coming here with his father, who had once told him that every place has a spirit, and some speak louder than others if you know how to listen. When he stepped into the clearing now, the same calm washed over him, but beneath it was something new, a subtle pull, like the gentle tug of a current beneath still water. He sensed that the forest was guiding him, drawing him towards something waiting just beyond the horizon of his understanding. and though he did not yet know what it was, he felt no fear, only the quiet certainty that whatever awaited him was part of a path he had already begun to walk.
Tahu lingered in the clearing, letting the quiet seep into him as naturally as air fills the lungs. The grass brushed gently against his legs, bending with the movement of the breeze as though bowing in greeting. A faint shimmer of warmth rose from the earth, carrying the scent of sunlit soil. He felt as though time itself had slowed, stretching into a calm, even pulse that matched the beating of his heart. At the far edge of the clearing lay a cluster of smooth stones, arranged in a loose circle, half hidden by tall blades of grass. Tahu remembered them. He and his father once sat here during summer evenings, listening to the forest hum while fireflies drifted through the air. But now, as he approached, he noticed something he had never seen before: a thin strip of woven grass, braided tightly, lying across the largest stone. It looked fresh, as if placed only moments earlier. He brushed his fingers over it. The braid was warm, carrying the faint scent of sage. No one from his tribe had reason to leave such a thing here, especially at this time of year. He lifted it gently, studying the pattern. 3 strands interwoven, each with a slight variation in color. It was a message, though its meaning remained hidden. He tied the braid loosely around his wrist, hoping that keeping it close would help him understand its purpose in time. A soft rustling came from the trees behind him. He turned, expecting a deer or perhaps a curious fox. But the forest stilled again, quiet as untouched snow. The only sound was the distant river, murmuring its endless song. Tahu breathed slowly, letting the calm settle back over him. He reminded himself that the forest often moves in ways unseen, its rhythms shaped by forces older than memory. Leaving the clearing, he followed a path seldom traveled, one that wound toward the northern ridge. The land slowly rose beneath his feet, and the trees grew denser, their shadows deepening into cool patches of shade. Birds called softly overhead, their voices muted as though drifting through layers of mist. Tahu's pace remained steady, his steps guided not by urgency, but by a gentle intuition that nudged him forward. As he climbed higher, he felt the air grow cooler. The wind carried a subtle change, an undertone he could not name, like the faint echo of a distant drum or the quiet pulse of something waiting to be found. He closed his eyes briefly and let the sensation wash through him, settling into his bones like a whisper carried from the past. Whatever lay ahead, he sensed it was intertwined with the braid on his wrist, the clearing, and the unspoken message woven into this quiet morning. And with each steady step, he felt himself moving closer to the truth the forest was slowly revealing.
The trail narrowed as Tahu reached the steeper slopes of the northern ridge. The trees rose closer together here, their branches interlacing overhead like protective hands, leaving only thin streams of sunlight to slip through. The earth was cool beneath his feet, scattered with pine needles that softened every footstep. He moved slowly, mindful of each breath, letting the quiet of the forest guide his pace. As he climbed, a faint sound drifted through the trees, so distant at first that he could have mistaken it for the wind. But the more he listened, the clearer it became. A low, rhythmic hum, steady and soft, like a voice singing from far away. It held no melody he recognized, yet it carried a gentle warmth that seemed to settle inside his chest. Tahu paused, letting the sound wash over him. It felt familiar, though he could not recall when he had heard it before, as if it belonged to a memory just out of reach. He pressed forward, following the hum as it wove its way between the trees. The path grew rockier and the undergrowth thinned until only moss coated the stones. The air cooled further, carrying the scent of mountain herbs and distant rain. Tahu inhaled deeply, feeling the crispness awaken something quiet and steady inside him. Eventually, he reached a ledge overlooking a small hollow nestled between two rising slopes. Light gathered there, softer than the sunlight filtering through the trees, almost as if the air itself glowed. And at the center of the hollow stood a figure, still, silent, facing away from him. Tahu froze, though not out of fear. The figure's presence felt natural, like an extension of the forest itself. Draped in garments woven from bark fibers and soft animal skins, the figure appeared to blend with the earth, its edges softened by the shimmering light around it. The humming sound flowed from the figure, rising and falling in a slow, soothing rhythm. Tahu swallowed gently, feeling the braid on his wrist grow warmer. A quiet understanding began to surface. Perhaps this figure was the one who had placed it on the stone, calling him here with a message he had not yet learned to read. He stepped closer, careful not to disturb the calm air. The ground responded softly under his feet, as though cushioning his approach. The figure did not turn, yet the humming deepened, carrying a sense of welcome. When Tahu reached the edge of the hollow, the figure finally stilled, allowing silence to return, like a settling mist. In that silence, Tahu felt the pull of something older than his tribe's stories, something woven into the land itself. He sensed that the moment he spoke or moved further would shift everything. So he remained still, breathing slowly, letting the calm embrace him. The forest, the light, the silent figure, all waited with him, as if the world had paused to allow this meeting to unfold in its own quiet time.
The hollow lay wrapped in stillness, its light shifting gently like the glow of embers beneath ash. Tahu waited, allowing the calm to steady his heartbeat. The figure before him remained motionless, yet its presence felt alive, as though the forest itself breathed through it. When the wind stirred, the figure's garment rustled softly, blending with the whisper of nearby leaves. At last, the figure turned. The movement was slow, deliberate, like the turning of a great tree toward sunlight. Tahu's breath caught as he saw the face, lined with age, yet serene, the eyes reflecting a depth that seemed to hold seasons, storms, and stories long forgotten. This was no stranger. It was Elder Sahali, a woman known to wander far beyond the tribe's common paths, seeking quiet places where the land spoke more clearly. Many believed she understood the earth better than any living person. She regarded Tahu with calm recognition, as though she had expected him at this precise moment. Her gaze drifted to the braid around his wrist, and a faint smile touched the corner of her mouth. Gentle, knowing, as though she saw more than he could yet comprehend. "You felt the call," she said, her voice low and smooth, blending seamlessly with the breeze. "Few hear it so clearly." Tahu bowed his head slightly, not out of formality, but respect. "I found the braid in the clearing," he said quietly. I thought it might be meant for me." "It was," she replied. "The land spoke your name, and I listened. The forest shifts when change approaches, and it asked that you walk this path today." She gestured for him to sit beside her, and he followed her to a patch of soft moss at the hollow's center. The ground felt warm, as though touched by sunlight even where shadows lingered. The air carried a faint scent of crushed mint and damp stone, calming his thoughts into a slow, steady flow. Elder Sahali closed her eyes for a moment, placing her hand against the earth. "This ridge," she murmured, "is waking. Something long silent has begun to stir beneath it. The land remembers old promises, and it calls for a witness, someone who will walk with patience, not fear." Tahu's pulse deepened, steady but attentive. "Why me?" She opened her eyes again, their dark surfaces reflecting a quiet certainty. "Because you listen," she said simply. "Not to words alone, but to the spaces between them. And the land needs someone who hears what is not spoken." The breeze shifted, carrying a hush through the hollow, as if the forest itself leaned closer to their conversation. Elder Sahali reached toward his wrist, brushing her fingers over the braid. "This is not a summons," she said softly. "It is an invitation to walk a path few ever choose, and fewer still complete." Tahu held her gaze, feeling the truth settle into him like a stone finding its place in the riverbed. Whatever lay ahead was not a task given, but a journey offered. And though he did not yet understand its purpose, he felt the calm certainty that he had already begun to accept it. The forest exhaled around them, the light warming, the air deepening with quiet promise. The path forward waited, patient, ancient, and alive.
Tahu sat beside Elder Sahali, letting her words settle like drifting leaves on still water. The silence that followed was not empty, it carried weight, as though the forest itself paused to listen. High above them, branches swayed in the soft breeze, spreading a gentle rustling sound that soothed his thoughts into a peaceful rhythm. Elder Sahali drew a small pouch from her woven belt and placed it between them. It was made from soft hide and decorated with simple, deliberate markings, lines and curves that seemed to flow like river currents. She untied the thin cord and gently tipped the pouch, allowing several small stones to spill into her palm. Each stone was smooth and pale, their surfaces etched with symbols so faint they appeared carved by time rather than hand. "These are memory stones," she said quietly. "Not because they hold our memories, but because they help us remember to listen to the land, the wind, the water, and to the quiet truths we often overlook." She arranged the stones in a small circle on the moss, the markings facing inward. Tahu watched, sensing that each placement mattered, though he could not yet understand how. The stones seemed to hum softly in the stillness, the faint vibration more felt than heard. "When the land wakes," Sahali continued, "it does not speak in words, it sends signs, shifts in the wind, changes in the paths of animals, the sudden stirring of quiet places." She touched the braid around his wrist. "And sometimes it sends a call to those who are willing to walk toward the unknown." Tahu lowered his gaze to the stones. "What is it waking to?" he asked softly. "That is what we must learn. But the land rarely reveals everything at once. It offers a single step, then another, a path shaped by patience."
She lifted one stone and placed it gently into his hand. It felt warm, as though it carried the heat of sunlight even in the shade. The symbol on its surface resembled a winding line, curling and looping like the path of a river. The warmth spread into his palm, flowing upward through his arm in the slow, soothing current that eased every tense corner of his mind. "This stone is the beginning," she said. "It guides the first stage of your journey." Tahu closed his fingers around it. "Where does the path lead?" She smiled, soft and knowing. "To a place older than our stories. A place where the land remembers what people have forgotten." A deep calm settled over the hollow, as though time paused to acknowledge her words. Even the breeze softened, leaving the air thick with a gentle stillness that wrapped around them like a warm blanket. "When you leave this ridge, follow the river north until its voice changes. There, the land will show you the next sign." Tahu nodded slowly, feeling the truth of her guidance resonate through him. The path ahead was unclear, yet he felt no fear, only a quiet pull, like the steady tug of water guiding a leaf downstream. He slipped the warm stone into a small pouch at his side. The moment he did, the forest seemed to breathe again, the wind lifting gently, leaves whispering overhead. Elder Sahali closed her eyes briefly, her expression peaceful. "The journey begins when the heart is ready, and yours has already taken its first step." Tahu rose, feeling the ground steady and familiar beneath his feet, yet touched now by a new sense of purpose. The ridge, the hollow, the quiet stones, all seemed to watch him with silent approval, as though acknowledging the start of something long awaited.
Tahu began his descent from the ridge, the forest opening quietly before him as if clearing a path. The air felt different now, cooler, more alert, yet still wrapped in a deep calm that eased his every step. The trees stood tall and silent, their shadows stretching gently across the slope. Each rustle of leaves seemed to accompany him, not as noise, but as a soft reminder that he was no longer wandering without purpose. He followed a narrow trail that curved downward toward the river. The ground grew softer with each step, the scent of damp earth and moss drifting upward. When he reached the base of the ridge, the sound of flowing water greeted him, steady and soothing. The river wound through the valley like a silver ribbon, its voice low and calm, as though calling him closer without urgency. Tahu stepped to the bank and crouched, letting his fingers glide through the cool current. The water pulsed rhythmically around his hand, carrying the faint vibrations of distant stones shifting beneath the surface. He closed his eyes and listened. The river's voice was familiar. It had been part of his life since childhood, but now he sensed something beneath the familiar flow, a subtle variation in tone, like a quiet breath hidden inside a whisper. He began walking north along the riverbank, staying close to the gentle curve of the water. The landscape gradually changed. The tall cedar trees gave way to clusters of slender willows, their thin branches dipping toward the surface. Birds drifted overhead in slow, sweeping circles, their cries muted by the thickening canopy of leaves. Tahu breathed deeply, letting the steady rhythm of the river guide the pace of his thoughts. After some time, he noticed the river's song shifting, its flow becoming deeper, more resonant, as though running over larger stones beneath the surface. He slowed, listening for the change Elder Sahali had described. The air grew heavier with moisture, and a faint mist settled along the bank. The ground dipped slightly, forming a shallow basin where reeds swayed gently in quiet clusters. Here, the voice of the river changed again.
The soft murmur sharpened into a low, vibrating hum, echoing faintly against the stones. Tahu stepped closer, kneeling beside a cluster of smooth rocks at the water's edge. As he leaned in to listen, he felt a subtle shift in the air, like the first deep breath before rain. Among the stones, partially hidden by reeds, he noticed something pale catching the light. He reached in carefully and lifted it out. It was another stone, but larger than the one Sahali had given him. Smooth and rounded, its surface etched with a single symbol shaped like a spiraling path. The markings matched the delicate style of the memory stones, yet this one carried a gentle weight that felt purposeful. The moment he held it, the river's tone deepened, as if acknowledging his touch. Warmth pulsed through the stone, radiating slowly into his palm. Tahu's breath steadied, settling into the same quiet rhythm as the flowing water beside him. This stone was the next sign. The river had led him to it with soft, patient guidance. He placed the stone carefully into his pouch, beside the first one. When he rose, he felt the land around him shift in subtle recognition, as though the forest, the water, and the wind all understood that he had found what he was meant to discover. The journey continued, and the river's changing voice flowed beside him, calm and unbroken, leading him deeper into the unknown path he had accepted.
Tahu walked along the narrowing riverbank, the sound of the water deepening beside him, as if growing more certain of its own direction. The mist hung low over the surface, drifting in pale ribbons that curled upward and dissolved into the trees. The air felt cooler here, carrying the crisp scent of wet stone and the faint sweetness of blooming reeds. Each breath he took seemed to settle more deeply into his chest, slowing his thoughts into a steady, peaceful rhythm. The further he traveled, the quieter the forest became. Birdsong faded into the distance, replaced by the occasional creak of swaying branches. The stillness was not empty, it felt purposeful, as if the land listened to his steps and adjusted its silence around him. The two stones in his pouch pressed lightly against his side, their subtle warmth reminding him of the path he now followed. Eventually, the river veered sharply to the east, carving its way through a cluster of massive boulders. The water rushed through the narrow gap, humming a deep, resonant tone that vibrated through the stones beneath Tahu's feet. He paused, listening. The vibration carried a rhythm, slow, steady, repeating. It felt like an echo of something ancient, a sound that had existed long before any human voice touched this valley. He climbed the boulders, moving carefully, feeling the cool surface beneath his hands. When he reached the top, he found a shallow pool on the other side, fed by the rushing water. The pool's surface shimmered strangely, light rippling across it and patterns that shifted like drifting smoke. As he stepped closer, the patterns changed, swirling inward toward the center as though responding to his presence. Tahu knelt at the edge, watching the slow spiral of light move across the water. It reminded him of the symbol carved in the stone he had just found, a path curling inward, drawing the eye toward its heart. A soft breeze touched his face, carrying with it the faint scent of sage, and in that moment he felt a quiet certainty that the pool held something meant for him. He leaned in and dipped his fingers into the water. It was cool, but not cold. The temperature felt balanced, almost deliberate. As the water rippled around his hand, the spiraling pattern brightened for a moment, then faded into a soft glow that spread gently across the surface. Beneath the shimmering light, something small and smooth emerged from the depths, rising slowly through the water as though lifted by unseen hands. A third stone surfaced, drifting toward him until it touched the tip of his fingers. He lifted it carefully. This one was darker than the others, its surface marked with a symbol resembling two parallel lines curving together like the meeting of two paths. When he closed his hand around it, warmth flowed through his palm, gentler than before, but steady, comforting, grounding. The pool stilled again, its surface flattening into a calm sheet of glass. The spiraling light dissolved into the reflection of the sky. Tahu slipped the third stone into his pouch, feeling a soft thrum of recognition from the land around him, as if the forest and river shared a single quiet breath. He rose slowly, the calm deepening through his body like settling sand. The path ahead remained unclear, yet the weight of the stones at his side felt like a guide, each one a whisper of the land's memory, each one drawing him closer to what waited beyond the next bend. With steady steps, he moved away from the glowing pool and followed the river deeper into the quiet, listening to its voice as it led him onward.
Taihu continued north, following the river as it widened and slowed, its voice settling into a mellow, rhythmic murmur. The forest grew denser around him, the trunks of ancient trees rising like pillars that held the sky in place. Shafts of golden light filtered through the canopy, illuminating drifting particles of dust that floated like tiny sparks caught in the air. With each step, the weight of the 3 stones in his pouch felt more defined, not heavy but grounding, as if anchoring him to the earth's quiet pulse. The path grew softer beneath his feet, cushioned by fallen leaves and layers of moss. A faint scent of cedar and damp earth wrapped around him, soothing his thoughts into calm clarity. He paused occasionally to listen, first to the wind, then to the river, then to the faint rustling of small creatures moving under the underbrush. Everything felt connected, as though the entire forest breathed with one slow, unified rhythm. As the afternoon light deepened, he noticed a shift in the air, subtle but unmistakable. The breeze carried a warmer note, tinged with the faint aroma of dried herbs and wood smoke. It was a scent that didn't belong to the wild forest. It hinted at presence, at people, at stories woven through fire and warmth. Taihu's pulse remained steady, but his senses sharpened as curiosity guided him forward. He followed the scent until he reached a small rise in the land. Beyond it lay a meadow he had never seen before, wide, open, and bordered by a ring of tall juniper trees. At its center burned a fire, small but steady, its smoke drifting straight upward in a thin, unwavering column. Seated beside it was a person wrapped in a cloak of dark woven fibers, their back turned toward him. The figure sat perfectly still, as though in deep listening. Taihu approached quietly, leaving space for the land to acknowledge his steps. When he was close enough to feel the warmth of the fire on his skin, the figure turned. It was a man older than any Taihu had seen in his tribe, his hair long and silver, braided loosely over one shoulder, his eyes reflecting the glow of the fire with a calm depth that felt both familiar and distant. "You have come far," the man said, his voice gentle, carrying the cadence of someone who had spent many years speaking only when necessary. "The land has guided you well." Taihu nodded, bowing his head slightly out of respect. "I follow the signs it gives," he replied softly. The man's gaze drifted to the pouch at his side. "3 stones," he murmured, as though confirming something he had long expected. "Each one a marker of what you have heard and of what you are ready to hear next." He extended his hand toward the fire. "Sit." The path ahead speaks more clearly when the mind is still. Taihu sat across from him, feeling the warmth seep into his skin, loosening the last traces of tension from his shoulders. The flames crackled in slow, steady bursts, sending sparks drifting upward like tiny glowing seeds. The old man watched the fire, his expression peaceful. "The land remembers," he said after a long pause. "It remembers every footstep, every promise, every silence. And when it begins to wake, it calls not through fear, but through quiet. Only those who walk with calm hearts can hear it." The fire's glow softened, flickering gently against the darkness gathering at the edges of the meadow. Taihu felt himself drawn deeper into the moment, the world narrowing to the steady breath of the flames and the calm voice of the old man. "Your journey is beginning," the elder continued. "The stones you carry are not answers, they are doors. And the land will show you how to open them, one quiet step at a time." The meadow seemed to hold its breath, the fire casting warm shadows that danced with slow, soothing motions. Taihu felt a deep stillness settle over him, preparing him for whatever the next sign might reveal.
Tahu sat quietly across from the elder as the fire's warm glow settled over the meadow. The sky above them darkened into soft shades of indigo, and the first faint stars began to shimmer through the branches of the surrounding juniper trees. The evening air cooled, carrying the scent of smoke, pine resin, and the faint sweetness of night-blooming flowers. The calm wrapped around him like a blanket, easing each breath into a slow, steady rhythm. For a long while, the elder said nothing more. He simply tended the fire with careful movements, adding thin branches that caught flame with gentle crackles. Tahu watched the sparks drift upward, rising for a moment before fading into the dark. The silence felt comforting, not empty, filled with the presence of the land, the rhythm of the wind, and the quiet wisdom woven into the elder's stillness. Eventually, the man lifted his gaze. His eyes reflected the firelight, steady and calm. "The stones you carry each speak in their own way. The first is the beginning, the stir of the land's awakening. The second is its voice, carried in the river's song. The third—" He paused, letting the fire shift before continuing. "The third is the meeting of paths, yours and the land's, converging for a purpose not yet spoken." Tahu felt a gentle warmth spread through his chest at the elder's words. He reached into his pouch, touching the smooth surfaces of the stones, each one pulsing faintly with its own quiet life. "You are wondering what lies ahead," the elder said, his tone soft, as though reading the question from Tahu's breath rather than his voice. "But the land does not reveal its heart all at once. It shows only what must be seen in the moment." He extended a hand toward the fire and gestured toward the open meadow. "Walk with me." Tahu rose, following him a short distance from the fire's glow. The grass beneath their feet rustled softly, cool from the evening air. At the center of the meadow, the ground dipped slightly into a shallow hollow where the starlight pooled in faint silver streaks. The elder knelt and placed his palm flat against the earth. "Listen," he whispered. Tahu mirrored the gesture, pressing his hand to the ground. At first, he felt nothing but the coolness of the soil, but then, slowly, a gentle vibration began to rise, a faint, rhythmic pulse that echoed softly through his fingertips, steady as a distant heartbeat. "This," the elder murmured,
is the breath beneath the land. Few ever notice it, even though it is always here. When the earth calls to someone, it becomes clearer, stronger, guiding their steps in ways that cannot be spoken. The vibration deepened for a moment before fading into stillness, leaving behind a lingering sense of connection, as though the land had acknowledged his presence. Tahu lifted his head, the calm settling even more deeply into his chest. "Where does it lead?" he asked softly. The elder stood slowly, his movements unhurried. He met Tahu's gaze with gentle certainty, to the place where the land first stirred, a place of old stories and quiet truths. At dawn, you must walk east, keeping the rising sun at your side. The land will guide you again. Tahu nodded, feeling the quiet weight of the moment settle around him like a soft cloak. The meadow, the fire, the stars, all seemed to hold the same peaceful promise. The journey was unfolding as it needed to. They returned to the fire, its warmth greeting them with a soft wave of heat. The flames flickered gently, casting slow-moving shadows over the grass. The elder settled into silence once more, and Tahu sat beside him, the calm of the night sinking into his bones. The world felt still, unhurried, as though time itself rested, and in that deep quiet, Tahu prepared for the next step of the path the land had invited him to walk.
The night moved gently across the plains as the people gathered around the embers of the central fire, each flame bending low as if tired from a long day of watching over the village. Ewan and Elise sat slightly apart, listening to the quiet hum of the elders' murmured conversations. The council's decision meant their journey would soon begin, but for now there was only stillness, like the world holding its breath. A cool breeze drifted through the camp, carrying with it the earthy scent of the riverbank and the faint sweetness of crushed sage. The soft rustle of willow leaves overhead blended with the distant chorus of crickets, creating a rhythm almost like a guiding heartbeat underneath the night. Elise gently touched the small clay pendant she wore, tracing the carved lines with thoughtful fingers. It was a symbol her grandmother had given her, meant to bring steadiness in uncertain moments. She held it now, not out of fear, but out of reverence for the path that awaited them. Ewan noticed her quiet gesture and offered a calm smile, one that needed no words. He too felt the weight of what lay ahead, but it was softened by the trust they shared. In the open field beyond the village, the horses rested beneath the stars. Their slow breaths rose in pale clouds, drifting into the night like whispers. Ewan stood after a moment and walked toward them, Elise following with silent steps. The grass bowed under their feet, its coolness seeping through their moccasins. When they reached the horses, Ewan gently ran his hand down the neck of the mare who would carry supplies. The animal leaned into his touch, as if sensing the importance of the days to come. Elise knelt to check the packs they had prepared earlier. She tightened a leather strap, adjusted a wrapped bundle of herbs, and placed her palm over the woven blanket tucked inside. Everything felt complete, yet the finality of it made her chest rise and fall with slow, steady breaths. She knew the land ahead was familiar in some ways. Forests they had walked in as children, plains where their ancestors' songs still lived. But this journey would be different. It carried purpose, spoken and unspoken. When they returned to the fire, the last of the council had retired for rest. Only the quiet glow of embers remained, pulsing like the last notes of a lullaby. Ewan added a small piece of wood, not to revive the flame, but to keep its gentle warmth alive a little longer. The soft crackle filled the silence around them, peaceful and unhurried. They sat once more beneath the vast sky, where the stars shimmered like distant campfires belonging to spirits roaming the heavens. Ewan leaned back slightly, letting his gaze wander up into the endless darkness. "We will rise before the first light," he said, his voice calm, spreading into the quiet like a soft ripple across still water. Elise nodded, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of the embers. "And we will walk with care," she murmured, her tone steady and warm, trusting that the land will guide us as it always has. The night deepened around them, slow and soothing. The world seemed to hum with quiet reassurance, the river's distant rush, the sigh of wind through the grass, the muted shifting of the horses in the field. Everything flowed together into a single gentle rhythm. Wrapped in that calm, they let their bodies relax and their thoughts drift, knowing dawn would come soon enough. The journey awaited, but for now, the silence held them like a comforting blanket, steady and serene beneath the watchful stars.
Morning arrived quietly, as if it wished not to disturb the peace of the sleeping village. The first light crept gently over the horizon, brushing the tops of the grass with pale gold. Ewan rose before the sun fully appeared, feeling the cool air settle across his skin like a soft cloth dipped in river water. He moved with unhurried steps, mindful of each sound, letting the waking world guide his pace. Elise emerged moments later, her movements smooth and measured. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, the woven threads carrying the faint scent of cedar smoke. The calm of dawn seemed to gather around her as she approached Ewan, both of them pausing to breathe deeply as the quiet glow spread across the land. They saddled the horses with slow, deliberate motions, each touch gentle and reassuring. The animals shifted softly beneath their hands, offering small puffs of warm breath in the cold morning air. The leather straps creaked faintly, blending with the low rustle of grass and the distant call of a waking bird. It was a serene rhythm, one that steadied the heart and eased the mind. As they began their journey, the village behind them softened into the early light, its familiar shapes merging with the soft haze of morning. Neither Ewan nor Elise spoke. There was no need. The silence was warm, a companion in itself, filled with trust and a quiet sense of purpose. Their footsteps and the horses' gentle strides created a soothing cadence along the earth. They traveled through open plains first, where stretches of tall grass swayed in slow waves. The wind brushed past them in long, calm breaths, carrying hints of sage and sun-warmed soil. Elise reached down, letting her fingers graze the tops of the blades as they passed, feeling the soft tickle against her skin. It grounded her, reminding her of the deep connection her people shared with the land. After some time, they reached the boundary of the forest, a serene stretch of old trees standing tall and patient, their branches whispering in the rising breeze. They paused at its edge,
taking in the gentle shadows that pooled beneath the canopy. Sunlight filtered through in delicate beams, creating a pattern on the forest floor like woven threads of gold and green. Iwan led the way inside, guiding his horse with a calm hand. The forest interior was cool and comforting, filled with the soft hush of leaves shifting overhead. Birds called in low, melodic notes, their voices drifting through the stillness like drifting smoke. Each sound echoed softly, wrapping around the travelers in a cocoon of natural lullabies. As they walked deeper, Elise noticed the familiar growth of medicinal plants along the path, ferns brushing softly against her legs, clusters of mint releasing their gentle fragrance when touched. She knelt briefly to gather a few leaves, placing them into a small pouch. The act felt like a quiet offering, a connection to her grandmother's teachings and the healing wisdom passed down through generations. Awan stopped near a fallen log covered in velvety moss, his hand brushing along its surface. He said, "The forest remembers everything," softly, his voice barely above a breath. "Every step, every story, every promise." Elise nodded, letting her gaze wander across the scattered patterns of roots and stones. The stillness here was comforting, like a deep, slow heartbeat beneath the earth. She felt the land guiding them forward, each path winding with purpose, even if unseen. The day continued in a gentle rhythm. They traveled unhurriedly, allowing the forest to set their pace. Light filtered through the canopy in shifting patterns, guiding them toward a small clearing where a quiet stream flowed. Its water moved with a soft murmur, brushing over stones in smooth, calming waves. They paused to rest there, kneeling beside the cool surface. Elise cupped water in her hands, letting it slip through her fingers like strands of liquid silver. Iwan filled a small pouch, tying it carefully. The horses drank nearby, their reflections rippling gently in the current. For a while, neither spoke. They simply listened to the trickling water, the distant rustle of wings, and the steady whisper of trees that had watched countless generations pass beneath them. When they continued onward, the light had shifted into warm afternoon tones. The forest path ahead glowed softly, inviting them deeper. Their steps matched the land's quiet rhythm, each moment unfolding with calm clarity. Their journey had only just begun, yet the peace of the forest wrapped around them like a guiding spirit, carrying them forward with the same gentle certainty as the flowing stream.
The afternoon light mellowed into a warm glow as Awan and Elise continued through the forest, following a narrow path that wound like a quiet stream between tall trunks. The air grew rich with the scent of pine and damp earth, and every step seemed to sink into the soft moss below, reducing their footsteps to near silence. It was the kind of stillness that soothed the spirit, a gentle hush that wrapped around them like a protective blanket. As they walked, the sound of the nearby stream faded, replaced by the distant echo of leaves stirring high above. The forest canopy swayed in unhurried waves, letting filtered beams of sunlight drift down in shifting shapes. Elise lifted her hand to catch one of the warm patches of light on her palm, feeling its gentle warmth as it lingered on her skin before slipping away through the trees. They approached a place where the forest opened into a broader meadow, the grass bending in long, graceful arcs. The sky expanded above them, wide and calm, painted with shades of soft blue and hints of fading gold. Wildflowers dotted the ground like small embers, swaying quietly in the breeze.
Awan slowed his steps, sensing the peace of the clearing, and allowed the horses to wander slightly ahead, grazing with calm, rhythmic motions. Elise knelt beside a cluster of tall, violet flowers, brushing her fingers lightly over the petals. She recognized them from her grandmother's teachings, plants known for easing the mind and quieting restless thoughts. She gathered a few with care, wrapping them in a piece of cloth and tucking them gently into her pouch. The simple act brought her comfort, reminding her that even far from home, the land offered familiar signs and supportive guidance. Awan wandered toward a small rise at the edge of the meadow. From there he could see the mountains in the distance, their outlines softened by the settling haze of late afternoon. They rose like ancient guardians, steady and unmoving, their peaks brushed with light. He stood quietly, letting his gaze rest on them, feeling their silent strength settle deep within his chest. Elise joined him, her footsteps soft in the tall grass. She followed his gaze, her expression calm. "We'll reach the foothills by tomorrow," she said in a low, soothing tone. "The old trails will be easier to follow once we're closer." Awan nodded, breathing slowly, allowing the expansive quiet to fill him. "Yes," he whispered, and something in the wind feels guiding. The breeze shifted then, passing over them with a gentle, cooling stroke. It carried the distant scent of rain, though the sky remained clear. Elise closed her eyes, letting the breeze brush against her hair. She felt, just for a moment, as if the land itself offered reassurance, an unspoken message that their path was true. As the light deepened, they led the horses toward a sheltered patch of trees at the meadow's edge, where they could rest for the night. The shadows stretched long and soft, settling comfortably across the earth. Awan cleared a small space beneath a wide-branched oak, while Elise gathered fallen wood, each piece dry and smooth to the touch. When the fire was lit, it crackled softly, its glow warm but gentle, never breaking the tranquility of the moment. The flames swayed with a calm rhythm, casting slow-moving patterns of light across the trunks around them. The scent of burning cedar drifted upward, mingling with the crisp evening air. They sat beside the fire, shoulders relaxed, watching the sky shift into deep blues. One by one, the stars emerged, faint flickers at first, then brighter, settling into familiar shapes. Elise leaned back on her hands, breathing in the cool, soothing night. Awan placed a small carved stone near the fire, an offering for safe passage, a gesture of gratitude for the day's quiet guidance. The forest around them softened into nocturnal hushes, the slow chirp of crickets, the rustle of small creatures moving through the underbrush, the delicate flutter of an owl's wings overhead. Each sound blended into a natural lullaby, steady and peaceful. Wrapped in the embrace of night, Awan and Elise let their thoughts quiet. The meadow, the mountains, and the ancient forest, they all seemed to breathe with them, their presence a calm reassurance on the unfolding journey. And in that serene stillness, they rested, ready to greet whatever gentle wisdom the next morning would bring.
Dawn emerged quietly over the meadow, spreading a pale silver glow across the land. The fire's last embers flickered faintly, their gentle warmth fading into the cool morning air. Awan stirred first, sitting up slowly as the soft hum of waking birds drifted from the treetops. He took a long, unhurried breath, feeling the crispness of morning settle around him like a calming blanket. Elise opened her eyes moments later, her expression peaceful as she listened to the rhythmic rustling of grass swaying in the early breeze. The sky above them brightened gradually, as though the sun wished to rise without disturbing the stillness of their resting place. She brushed a few fallen leaves from her shawl, her movement smooth and quiet, then glanced toward the mountains in the distance,
Their peaks were softened by dawn's gentle haze, tinted in muted shades of blue and lavender. Awan fed a small piece of wood to the embers, not to revive the fire fully, but to warm the air with a soft glow while they prepared for the day. The faint crackle blended with the calming breath of the wind, creating a soothing harmony that eased them into wakefulness. The horses grazed nearby, their tails swaying in quiet arcs, their hooves whispering over the dew-damp grass. As they shared a simple morning meal, dried berries and soft cornbread, they spoke little, letting the quiet settle comfortably around them. The land felt peaceful, almost protective, its presence grounding them before the day's travel. When they finished, Elise packed their supplies with care, checking each bundle as she had learned to do since childhood. Awan ensured the horses' saddles were secure, running his hand down each leather strap with steady, practiced movements. They set out just as the first rays of sunlight touched the tops of the trees. The meadow stretched behind them in a soft wash of golden light, while the forest ahead beckoned with long shadows and cool air. As they followed a narrow trail toward the distant hills, the world seemed to move at a calming pace, each sound softened by the lingering hush of morning. The trees grew taller as they walked, their trunks spaced wide enough for light to drift through in gentle beams. Dust motes floated lazily within the sunlit patches, glimmering like tiny drifting stars. Elise reached out to touch the bark of a large pine, feeling the textured ridges beneath her fingertips. "This part of the forest feels old," she whispered, "like it holds stories we haven't heard yet." Awan nodded as he stepped over a gnarled root twisting across the path. "The elders say these Crees watch over travelers. They've stood through storms, through seasons, through changes we'll never see." His voice was calm, carrying a quiet reverence. Hours passed in soothing rhythm. The forest sounds shifted gradually from the early chirping of birds to the deeper hum of daytime life. Soft breezes stirred branches overhead, creating a gentle rustling like a whispered lullaby. Every so often the trail offered a glimpse of the mountains growing closer, their slopes now sharper and more defined against the sky. By midday, they reached a place where the land sloped downward into a wide, rocky streambed. Water flowed steadily over smooth stones, its movement slow and melodic. They guided the horses down the bank, pausing to let them drink. Elise knelt near the edge, dipping her hands into the cool water and washing her face with slow, calming motions. The fresh chill soothed her, steadying her breath. Awan found a flat stone and sat for a moment, watching the current. The sunlight reflected off the surface in shimmering ripples, casting soft patterns across his hands. "This stream is the one my father spoke of. He followed it once on a long journey. He said it leads safely toward the lower mountain paths." Elise lifted her gaze, letting her eyes follow the stream's gentle bend. The knowledge brought comfort, a quiet assurance that they moved along a familiar route, even if neither had traveled it themselves. "Then we follow it," she said softly, tying her water pouch closed. The rest of the afternoon unfolded in slow, peaceful steps. They moved alongside the stream as it wound between rocks and tall grass, its steady murmur guiding them forward. The light gradually shifted to a warm golden hue, brushing the water and the leaves with soft radiance. As evening approached, they reached the foothills where the ground rose in gentle slopes. The air grew cooler, carrying the faint scent of high mountain winds. They chose a sheltered spot beneath a cluster of cedar trees, the ground soft with fallen needles. Awan built a small fire while Elise arranged their blankets. The flames glowed softly, casting long, quiet shadows. The air vibrated with distant mountain echoes, soft whistles of wind, the occasional muted call of a bird settling in for the night. Wrapped in the serene calm of the foothills, Awan and Elise sat close to the gentle warmth of the fire. Above them, the stars emerged once again, patient and steady, watching over the travelers as they prepared for rest. The night held its breath in a peaceful hush, and the land around them felt like a companion, steady, ancient, and quietly guiding them toward the next part of their journey. The night settled around the foothills with a gentle embrace, and when morning returned, it did so with the softest of light, pale and cool, spreading slowly across the land like a careful hand smoothing a blanket. Awan opened his eyes to the faint rustle of cedar needles drifting in the breeze. Each movement was quiet and rhythmic, as though the trees themselves breathed in steady harmony with the world. Elise rose shortly after, moving with an unhurried grace, her shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders. For a long moment she simply stood, listening to the quiet hum of the mountains waking. A distant echo drifted through the air, perhaps the call of an eagle far above, carried gently down the slopes. The fire from the night before had collapsed into a mound of glowing embers. Awan crouched beside it and added a single piece of dry cedar. The sweet scent lifted into the cooling air, mixing with the crisp purity of the mountain breeze. They warmed their hands slowly, savoring the calm before beginning another day's travel. After a simple meal, they prepared their things with practiced care. The horses shifted softly, stamping the earth in slow, deliberate motions. Awan ran his hand along the neck of his stallion, feeling the warmth beneath the glossy coat. "We'll travel lightly today," he murmured. The horse lowered its head in quiet acceptance. The path ahead rose into the lower mountain trails, winding between clusters of cedar and fir. As they began to climb, the air changed, thinner, cooler, yet refreshing in a way that awakened the senses without disturbing the peaceful rhythm of their steps. Their breaths puffed in faint clouds, drifting upward before dissolving into the open sky. Birdsong came in gentle intervals, not lively but steady and echoing, as though the mountains answered each note with a soft return. The trail beneath them was lined with stones smoothed by years of wind and water. Each footstep created a faint crunch, softened by the layers of pine needles scattered across the ground. Elise paused occasionally to observe the plants that grew along the incline. Mountain sage with its soothing aroma, clusters of hardy berries clinging to thin branches. She gathered a few leaves of pine, crushing them lightly between her fingers to release their clean, calming scent. Awan smiled faintly as the breeze carried the fragrance toward him. After some time, they reached a vantage point where the land opened into a wide overlook. The world below stretched endlessly, rolling plains, soft meadows, distant ribbons of streams reflecting the sky. It was a quiet, breathtaking expanse, washed in the muted glow of morning light. Elise stepped to the edge, her eyes tracing the familiar curves of the land they had traveled. "It feels different from here," she whispered, "like the earth is both larger and more gentle than I remembered." Awan stood beside her, arms resting loosely at his sides. "Up here, everything slows," he replied. "Even the wind moves with care." They stood for a long moment, letting the stillness settle within them. The mountains radiated a calm endurance, as if holding centuries of stories beneath their stone skin. A faint rumble echoed deep within the cliffs. Nothing threatening, just the sound of the land adjusting under the morning sun. Continuing their ascent, the trail narrowed,
weaving between tall trees whose trunks rose straight and strong. Sunlight filtered through the branches in thin ribbons, painting the ground in shifting patterns. Their shadows moved softly across the trail, stretching and shrinking with each step. By midday, they reached a small plateau where a clear spring trickled from the rocks. The water was cold, pure and smooth against their hands. They rested there for a while, listening to the steady drip of water against stone. It was a tranquil rhythm, almost hypnotic in its constancy. Awan filled their water pouches as Elise sat beside the spring, her fingers lightly trailing through the shallow pool. The surface rippled gently, forming soft rings that faded slowly outward. The quiet here felt deeper, almost sacred. As afternoon light began its slow descent, they resumed their journey. The mountain path grew more level, guiding them through a gentle rise of grassy slopes and scattered boulders marked with ancient lichen. The air held a faint sweetness, touched with the scent of distant wildflowers hidden among the rocks. When evening approached, they found shelter beneath an overhanging cliff where soft moss carpeted the ground. Awan collected small pieces of fallen wood while Elise arranged their blankets in a sheltered corner where the wind could not reach them. The fire, once lit, glowed softly against the stone wall, its warmth spreading in smooth waves. The mountains around them faded into dusky blues, their peaks silhouetted against a sky slowly filling with stars. The wind sang through the grasses in a low, soothing whisper, and the flame flickered in calm, steady strokes. Awan and Elise sat close to the fire, shoulders relaxed, listening to the ancient hush of the mountains as night deepened around them. Wrapped in the quiet strength of the highland air, they rested once more, knowing that tomorrow would bring them closer to the heart of the journey and deeper into the mountain's gentle, enduring embrace.
The morning in the mountains arrived with a quiet subtlety, as if the sun wished not to disturb the deep stillness that lingered from the night. Soft light spread over the cliffs in gentle strokes, warming the moss-covered ground beneath the overhanging rock where Awan and Elise had slept. A cool breeze drifted past, carrying with it the faint scent of wild mint and distant alpine flowers. Awan opened his eyes to the soft hush of wind swirling along the stones. He sat up slowly, stretching with deliberate calm, feeling the mountain air settle comfortably around him. The fire had burned down to a small ring of cinders, and Elise was already awake, sitting quietly near the ashes with her shawl drawn close around her shoulders. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the sky shifted from pale lavender into soft gold. "I dreamt of the river," she said in a voice just above a whisper, her tone serene. "The one near our home. It flowed quietly, almost like it was showing us the way." Awan nodded gently. "Our dreams often walk ahead of us," he murmured. "Sometimes they clear the path before we arrive." They shared a small, unhurried meal as the first true warmth of daylight reached them. The mountains glowed softly, their stone faces bathed in calm morning light. The horses grazed at the edge of the plateau, their breaths rising in faint clouds that dissolved into the cool air. When they set out again, the trail rose gently before curving into a higher pass. The path was narrow but steady, bordered by thick patches of sagebrush and clusters of small yellow flowers clinging to cracks in the rock. Each step echoed subtly against the cliffs, blending into the wind's muted song. As they climbed, the air grew thinner but remained soothing,
filled with a clear, crisp purity that made each breath feel calm and cleansing. Elise placed her hand on the rugged stone beside her from time to time, grounding herself in the mountain's quiet strength. The world around them shifted into highland quiet. A lone hawk glided across the sky, its wings broad and steady. The distant sound of its call faded into the valley below, leaving behind a delicate silence. Awan paused to watch it disappear beyond the ridgeline, feeling a sense of ancient connection, as though the bird carried messages between earth and sky. By midday, they reached a higher ridge where the wind moved in long, slow sweeps, brushing through the tall grasses that managed to survive the altitude. The grasses swayed together in a smooth, rhythmic motion, creating a soft whispering sound like countless voices humming in harmony. Elise knelt beside a rocky outcrop, noticing a group of hardy plants growing in a sheltered hollow. Their leaves were thick and silver-green, shaped to hold moisture from the mountain mist. She touched them gently, recognizing their soothing properties from her grandmother's teachings. She collected a small handful, wrapping them carefully before placing the bundle in her pouch. "You always see what others would walk past," Awan said warmly. "It's the land that shows me. I only listen." They continued along the ridge until the path dipped into a narrow valley between two rising cliffs. The valley floor was lined with smooth stones and patches of soft grass, and a quiet stream ran through the center, so thin and gentle that its sound was barely more than a soft murmur. They followed its curve for a while, letting its gentle rhythm steady their pace. Eventually, the valley opened into a wide basin, bathed in afternoon light. Large boulders lay scattered across the clearing, shaped by time and wind into smooth, rounded forms. Awan approached one and placed his palm against its cool surface. "Old spirits rest in stones like these," he said softly. "They hold the memory of everything this land has seen." Elise closed her eyes and felt the air shift around them. The basin was unusually still, almost sacred in its quiet. The faint scent of juniper drifted on the breeze, and somewhere far above, the softened cry of an eagle echoed through the cliffs. They chose to rest there for the evening, drawn by the peaceful presence of the place. As the sun lowered behind the mountains, long shadows stretched across the basin. Ace and Elise gathered bits of dry brush and small pieces of fallen wood, creating a small fire whose glow flickered gently against the stone walls. As twilight deepened, the firelight blended with the cool blue of the approaching night. The wind stilled completely, leaving only the soft crackle of burning cedar. The world seemed suspended in a delicate balance, neither day nor night fully claiming the moment. Awan sat beside Elise, both wrapped in the warm hush of the mountains. "We're close," he said quietly, his voice calm and steady. "Yes," she whispered, her eyes reflecting the fire's gentle light. "Tomorrow the mountain will show us what it has been holding." Wrapped in the serene breath of the highlands, they rested once more, the calm of the ancient basin settling deep within them like a comforting, guiding presence.
The night in the mountain basin passed in deep, unbroken silence. When morning arrived, it did so with a gentle touch, a faint glow spreading across the cliffs, turning their rugged edges into smooth silhouettes. Awan woke to the cool air brushing against his face, the scent of juniper lingering softly from the evening before. The fire had reduced to a thin ribbon of ash, and the world around them felt still, as though it were waiting. Elise stirred soon after, rising with unhurried movements. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stepped into the open space of the basin, letting the first rays of sunlight warm her cheeks. The air was crisp, carrying the quiet murmur of the thin stream nearby. She closed her eyes, taking a slow breath until her chest filled with the calming purity of the morning. Awan approached her quietly. "The mountain feels different today," he said, his voice low and gentle, "as if something is drawing us forward." Elise nodded. There is a calm in the air, but also a kind of waiting, like the land wants us to listen more closely. They shared a simple meal and packed their belongings, taking care to leave the basin as untouched as they had found it. The horses were calm, their breaths rising in smooth puffs against the cool air. Awan placed a hand on his stallion's strong neck, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath the warm coat. It reassured him, grounding him in the quiet certainty of the day. They followed the narrow trail leading out of the basin, the path rising gently toward a higher ridge. The morning sun painted the stones in soft gold, and the wind moved slowly between the cliffs, brushing past them like a steady hand. Each step carried the soothing rhythm of the mountains themselves, slow, steady, patient. As they climbed, the land opened into a series of terraces carved naturally into the mountainside. On each level, clusters of hardy plants grew: sage, alpine mint, and small blue flowers that swayed lightly in the breeze. Elise paused to run her fingers over their delicate petals. "These don't grow on the lower paths," she murmured. "We're close to the place the elders spoke about." Awan nodded, studying the cliff walls ahead. Strange markings appeared faintly on the stone, curved shapes, almost like echoes of old carvings softened by centuries of wind. He traced one with his fingertips, feeling the smoothness of time worn into the rock. He whispered, "Someone came before us, long ago." They continued on, moving upward through the terraces until the trail narrowed between two rising walls of stone. The wind quieted almost completely here, leaving the passage filled with a profound, soothing stillness. Their footsteps sounded soft against the earth, as though the land absorbed each sound with care. Beyond the narrow pass, the terrain changed again. The mountain opened into a wide, elevated meadow tucked between towering peaks. Grass waved in slow, graceful arcs, and scattered boulders marked the landscape like silent guardians. A thin ribbon of water trickled along one side, clear and calm, reflecting the sky above. Elise stopped, breath drifting out in a slow exhale. "I've dreamed of a place like this. A quiet hollow, high in the mountains, untouched and waiting." Awan stepped beside her, letting the peacefulness of the meadow settle over him. He said, "This feels right, like the mountain brought us here for a reason." They guided the horses across the meadow, moving at an unhurried pace. A faint path became visible, barely more than a subtle curve in the grass, shaped perhaps by animals or by the footsteps of travelers many years before. The air grew warmer, carrying a soft scent of wild herbs. At the far end of the meadow lay a cluster of ancient cedars, their trunks thick and weathered, their branches stretching out in sheltering arcs. Beneath the largest tree, the ground dipped into a shallow hollow. Elise knelt there, brushing aside a layer of soft needles. Something smooth met her fingertips. A stone, perfectly shaped and cool to the touch. As she lifted it, Awan noticed faint markings etched into the surface, gentle lines forming patterns that resembled water, mountains, and perhaps even paths. The carvings were worn, but still visible, their curves flowing with a kind of quiet wisdom. Elise held the stone against her palms. These symbols, they're like the ones my grandmother described, guides left by those who walked with the old spirits. Awan crouched beside her, his voice barely above a breath. Then the mountain has truly brought us to the place the elders hoped we'd find. A calm settled over them, deep and steady. The wind remained soft, the meadow quiet, the sky wide and peaceful overhead. It felt as though the land itself had opened its heart to them, inviting them to rest, listen, and understand. As the sun drifted past its highest point, they remained beneath the ancient cedars, letting the mountain's gentle, enduring silence wrap around them, preparing them for whatever deeper truths waited just ahead.
Night deepened across the plains, spreading a soft blue darkness that shimmered with distant starlight. Tahu walked beside the quiet stream that bordered the encampment, feeling the cool touch of the night wind against his face. The air carried the faint scent of sage and warm embers drifting from the fires behind him. He listened to the soft chorus of crickets hidden in the tall grass, their steady rhythm calming the remaining tension in his chest. Ahead, the stream bent around a cluster of smooth stones, and Tahu followed its curve, gazing at the sky reflected on the water's slow-moving surface. He saw the soft glow of the moon mirrored between drifting ripples, its light stretching like a silver path guiding his thoughts toward peace. He paused near an old cottonwood tree, its branches arching above him like sheltering arms. Touching its rough bark, he closed his eyes and breathed in deeply, letting his worries dissolve into the quiet night. The past days had been long, filled with searching, learning, and confronting shadows he had not expected to face. Yet here, beneath the watchful sky, he felt a gentle clarity settling within him, as though the land itself had offered him a moment of stillness. The wind shifted softly, carrying the distant sounds of the tribe preparing for rest, the muted voices, the rustling hides, the final crackle of fires fading into embers. Tahu opened his eyes and looked toward the horizon where darkness blended with the soft glow of moonlit clouds. He felt the presence of his ancestors around him, not as distant spirits, but as calm reminders that every step he had taken was part of a much larger path. The stream continued its slow, soothing journey beside him, and he followed its quiet song back toward the encampment, his heart steady, his spirit grounded in the gentle promise of the coming dawn.
Morning arrived quietly, as if it wished not to disturb the peace of the sleeping village. The first light crept gently over the horizon, brushing the tops of the grass with pale gold. Iwan rose before the sun fully appeared, feeling the cool air settle across his skin like a soft cloth dipped in river water. He moved with unhurried steps, mindful of each sound, letting the waking world guide his pace. Elise emerged moments later, her movements smooth and measured. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, the woven threads carrying the faint scent of cedar smoke. The calm of dawn seemed to gather around her as she approached Awan, both of them pausing to breathe deeply as the quiet glow spread across the land. They saddled the horses with slow, deliberate motions, each touch gentle and reassuring. The animals shifted softly beneath their hands, offering small puffs of warm breath in the cold morning air.
The leather straps creaked faintly, blending with the low rustle of grass and the distant call of a waking bird. It was a serene rhythm, one that steadied the heart and eased the mind. As they began their journey, the village behind them softened into the early light, its familiar shapes merging with the soft haze of morning. Neither Ewan nor Elise spoke. There was no need. The silence was warm, a companion in itself, filled with trust and a quiet sense of purpose. Their footsteps and the horses' gentle strides created a soothing cadence along the earth. They traveled through open plains first, where stretches of tall grass swayed in slow waves. The wind brushed past them in long, calm breaths, carrying hints of sage and sun-warmed soil. Elise reached down, letting her fingers graze the tops of the blades as they passed, feeling the soft tickle against her skin. It grounded her, reminding her of the deep connection her people shared with the land. After some time, they reached the boundary of the forest, a serene stretch of old trees standing tall and patient, their branches whispering in the rising breeze. They paused at its edge, taking in the gentle shadows that pooled beneath the canopy. Sunlight filtered through in delicate beams, creating a pattern on the forest floor like woven threads of gold and green. Ewan led the way inside, guiding his horse with a calm hand. The forest interior was cool and comforting, filled with the soft hush of leaves shifting overhead. Birds called in low, melodic notes, their voices drifting through the stillness like drifting smoke. Each sound echoed softly, wrapping around the travelers in a cocoon of natural lullabies. As they walked deeper, Elise noticed the familiar growth of medicinal plants along the path, ferns brushing softly against her legs, clusters of mint releasing their gentle fragrance when touched. She knelt briefly to gather a few leaves, placing them into a small pouch. The act felt like a quiet offering, a connection to her grandmother's teachings and the healing wisdom passed down through generations. Ewan stopped near a fallen log covered in velvety moss, his hand brushing along its surface. He said, "The forest remembers everything," softly, his voice barely above a breath. "Every step, every story, every promise." Elise nodded, letting her gaze wander across the scattered patterns of roots and stones. The stillness here was comforting, like a deep, slow heartbeat beneath the earth. She felt the land guiding them forward, each path winding with purpose, even if unseen. The day continued in a gentle rhythm. They traveled unhurriedly, allowing the forest to set their pace. Light filtered through the canopy in shifting patterns, guiding them toward a small clearing where a quiet stream flowed. Its water moved with a soft murmur, brushing over stones in smooth, calming waves. They paused to rest there, kneeling beside the cool surface. Elise cupped water in her hands, letting it slip through her fingers like strands of liquid silver. Ewan filled a small pouch, tying it carefully. The horses drank nearby, their reflections rippling gently in the current. For a while, neither spoke. They simply listened to the trickling water, the distant rustle of wings, and the steady whisper of trees that had watched countless generations pass beneath them. When they continued onward, the light had shifted into warm afternoon tones. The forest path ahead glowed softly, inviting them deeper. Their steps matched the land's quiet rhythm, each moment unfolding with calm clarity. Their journey had only just begun, Yet the peace of the forest wrapped around them like a guiding spirit, carrying them forward with the same gentle certainty as the flowing stream.
The sun climbed slowly above the horizon, casting long beams of warm light across the valley as Tahu walked toward the open meadow beyond the river. Each step felt lighter than the one before, as though the land itself encouraged him forward with a gentle hand. The dew-covered grass brushed softly against his ankles, sparkling like tiny stars fallen to earth. A faint breeze drifted through the meadow, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the distant hum of the waking world. Tahu paused, letting the warmth settle over him, breathing deeply until his chest filled with a sense of calm certainty he had not felt in many seasons. He reached a smooth stone at the center of the clearing, a place where his ancestors had once come to speak with the spirits of the land. Kneeling, he placed both hands upon its cool surface, feeling the quiet pulse of the earth beneath it. The memories of his journey passed through his mind. Each challenge, each moment of doubt, each whisper of guidance from the wind and water. None of it felt heavy now. Instead, it formed a quiet tapestry of meaning that wrapped around him like a comforting cloak. As he closed his eyes, he sensed a presence around him, not a voice, not a shape, but a gentle awareness, like the soft pressure of a hand resting over his heart. It brought no commands, no visions, only a deep reassurance that he was exactly where he needed to be. The fear he had carried dissolved, replaced by a warm stillness that spread through his body like sunlight. When he opened his eyes again, the entire valley lay before him, bright and alive, a reminder that every ending carried the promise of quiet renewal. Tahu rose slowly, feeling grounded, steady, and quietly transformed. The path back to his people awaited him, lined with the soft sounds of morning and the promise of days filled with purpose and peace. As he walked toward the village, the sky widened above him, filled with drifting clouds and the gentle flight of birds crossing the newly brightened air. And with each step, he felt the rhythm of the land echo inside him, a calm, soothing harmony that would guide him for the rest of his life.